Hi, this is Jack Stanley. I wanted to continue my talk on the 1960s. One of the things that was really fascinating in the 1960s was musical entertainment. Now, I remember my first phonograph. It had belonged to my father. It had a steel needle. It played 78 RPM records. Now, in this day and age, most people don't even know what a 33 and a third record is anymore. My records played at 78, and I had what was called a Bing Crosby jukebox. And I played the daylights out of that. I think I wore all my records out. They were mainly kiddie records, multicolored records. And they played at 78. And then I got another phonograph after I wore out the Bing Crosby jukebox, which I wish I had today. Kind of valuable. Well, I got a player that played 4 speeds. Now you may say 4 speeds? What were the 4 speeds? Well, you had 16, 33, 45, and 78. Those were the 4 speeds available, and a lot of times the 16 RPM were educational records or recordings for the blind and stuff like that. And I had a number of records that played at 16. 33 and a third was for long play, which was the real high class records. And then 45 was for popular singles. And 78 was looked upon as passe and old fashioned, but everybody had 78 records. I mean, they had manufactured them for 60 some odd years. Therefore, they were everywhere. And you couldn't go to a garage sale or a church auction or something without finding piles, mountains of 78s. And we were making dishes out of them, melting them, doing this, that, and everything else. We didn't care. They were just old records. Of course, today I have a very different feeling about that, but I hadn't reached that point of understanding yet about how important old records were. Another thing is, with all of this music, everything was on record. You didn't really have much for kids on radio. There were a few programs on television for kids, but not much. By the mid-60s, yes. You had Captain Kangaroo. You had Diver Dan. You had Jerry and Knucklehead's Clubhouse. And then you had Batman in the mid-60s. You had, what was the other program that kids liked to watch? There were so many of them, maybe it'll come to me later, but Batman Lost in Space, another thing, 1965. There was a couple of programs I really liked on television at the time that today are totally forgotten. One was called My Mother the Car. And I always liked old-fashioned stuff from the time I was a little kid. And so I was fascinated with the show, with the talking car, which was the mother, and Jerry Van Dyke, I think, was the star of it. And the song was, "It's a 1928 Porter, la-da-da-da-da-da, my mother the car, beep beep." And I still remember that. I have no idea why I have remembered that for 50 years. And there was another show that came out that was equally bad that I liked. Shows you my taste for television. It was called It's About Time, It's About Space. And I remember that one too, the song. It's about time, it's about space, it's about two men in a crazy place, or something like that. I think it played like 12 episodes and it was canceled. I mean, it was really bad. But nonetheless, there was some really, really interesting entertainment. But most of it was in records. Because records were everything. That's what kids would do. And you'd have one of the big things in those early days was the Chipmunks. Christmas, Christmas time is here. And they'd be on 33 and a third. And our fun thing was put it on 16 on the phonographs and listen to how they actually sounded. because of course they would sing it extremely slowly in deep voices, and then they would just speed it up for the chipmunks. And so that was kind of entertaining for us. And there were lots of other things that you would do. You would have like records that would play with a film or slides. You also had a lot of historic stuff, like Hear It Now with, what was his name? Edward R. Murrow. He did a lot of that stuff. And of course, while Kennedy, getting back to him, I mean, after his assassination, there were a lot of LPs of his speeches and speaking and press conferences and the like. Another thing that comes to mind as well with entertainment is you had these viewers. Years ago, long before my time, you had something called stereopticons, which would show a dual photograph and you would get a sense of 3D. And they had those for kids, and they would have slides, and they were in color, which was real exciting. And the other thing that was really big in the 60s was comic books. And we love comic books, and everybody, Archie or Batman, Superman, and the like. And there were lots of monster magazines and stuff like that. Monsters had a big time in the 1960s. Seemed to be a big time for monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein, and the like. And other kinds of entertainment that came along were toys, like creepy crawlers. Or I had the Great Garloo, which was insane. It shot rockets out of its head, and of course other things that we had that were kind of fun were trains. It's hard to imagine today what a big thing train sets were in the 1960s and probably the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I remember going to Lionel train stores, and you would walk in, and it was absolute heaven for a kid, because surrounding you were like 30 tracks, and each track was a different size and different types of trains, and they had huge trains, small trains, tiny trains. I loved every bit of that. Another thing at the time also were Matchbox cars, and we'd collect all kinds of things like that. It was kind of fun. Lots of great entertainment. You don't even think about it today. Today's world is so incredibly different. We played stickball on the street. The Rambler was second base. The fire hydrant was third base. And you used a rubber ball and a broom handle and you played. You went out and you did stuff. We were always running, always playing, riding bikes, taking baseball cards. We used to toss baseball cards. That was a fun thing to do. And then you would take clothespins and put baseball cards on your bike so it would sound like a motorcycle until you beat the crap out of the baseball card and it wouldn't work anymore. Oh, how many Mickey Mantles and Joe DiMaggio's and stuff I must have finished off while riding my bike. And interesting stuff at that time. And a lot of it was space related. There were so many toys, so many robots, so many automated things that weren't really automated, but we kind of made believe they were. And one of the major factors in the 1960s with toys was imagination. Something we really don't have anymore in many respects. But I'll talk more about this stuff in another episode of the 1960s. Thank you.